I appreciate you being here. Let us go to closing statements. Mr. Messer, you're first.
Thank you, Tony. You know, I started tonight with a story from my mother. I'm going to finish with a quick story from my son. Like probably a lot of you, I learned a lot of life lessons from my kids. My son Hudson is 10 years old. And just recently, on the day of the Super Bowl, some of you know we went through a little drama with the Colts coach here. I had a conversation with my son where I said, you know, Hudson, I think I might almost be rooting for the Patriots tonight. You know, we've got this offensive coordinator coming to us. Hudson looked at me and he said, Dad, that's not who we are. Okay? So true story, about 6 months before that, as I was getting ready for my announcement kickoff in Moorestown, I see Dana Caldwell from Moorestown at his home. We were driving and Hudson said to me, he said, Dad, you know, I've been thinking about Joe Donnelly. And I said, really, buddy? You've been thinking about Joe Donnelly? He said, yeah, I've been thinking about Joe Donnelly. I said, so what are you thinking about Joe Donnelly? He said, Dad, you know, Joe Donnelly is a leader. I mean, he's not a leader, he's a follower. And why would you elect a follower to be your leader, right? So now when you think about who Joe Donnelly's been following, it's even worse. Because though Joe talks conservative, when he's back here in Indiana, he goes to Washington and he votes with Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren 85% of the time. As I said earlier, you're here tonight because you know, of course, those folks are wrong way more than 15% of the time. We need to elect a candidate for the U.S. Senate that will spend this election focused on Joe Donnelly. Because when we tell Hoosiers the truth about Joe Donnelly's record, that as a gentleman in a villa said to me the other day, the problem with Joe Donnelly is not what he says, it's what he does. When Hoosiers know the truth, Joe Donnelly will be out of a job. Thank you.
Mr. Rokita, 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you everyone again for listening and keeping the Republic. It comes down to this. Do you really want to beat Joe Donnelly? I do. And if you do, there's only one contender up here, 2 pretenders. Who do you trust to beat Joe Donnelly? The guy who's raised taxes 45 times, including the largest one in history, who said here tonight that the minute he gets into office, as soon as he can, he's going to solve some things, and the only evidence we have of him solving anything is to raise your taxes? He voted Democrat his entire adult life, and he won't tell us if he voted for Hillary or Obama in 2008 when he pulled primary Democrat ballots. He talks about his successful business, but doesn't know if his products come from China or Mexico. I do. It's China and Mexico. He calls himself a successful businessman and takes $400,000 of our taxpayer dollars for another company in subsidies. Tony, you didn't ask us, but I'm against subsidies. The guy who, when he wants to campaign, has to get on a plane to come to Indiana to do his first campaign stop. Is that who's going to beat Joe Donnelly? Any one of these two, Joe Donnelly's the tax cutter in the race. Any one of these two, Joe Donnelly's going to eat him alive with the vulnerabilities. And that's just the fact of the matter, and that's why I'm running. I have more ballot exposure and more votes than Joe Donnelly has on the statewide ballot. I certainly have more work ethic, and I'm going to be able to work circles around him. And that's what we have to decide here tonight. Joe Donnelly, Luke's right, Joe Donnelly must go. He absolutely must go. Who do you trust to get the job done? Running against an incumbent senator, no matter how vulnerable or from what party or whatever state, is serious business. We'll never get him if we don't get him in this term. We can get him in this term if we pick the right candidate. Work ethic, statewide ballot exposure, where I know the state, 92 counties a year, 45,000 miles, and the state knows me. We'll get it done if you nominate the right candidate. I ask you for your support. I ask you for a vote. My name's Todd Rokita.
Mr. Braun, 2 minutes.
So we've had a robust discussion here, and thank you all for being here to listen. You know, President Trump was right. He said we do not need more career politicians in D.C. And what you're hearing here is classic talk before election, do something else when you get to D.C. I've built my career in the trenches of conservatism, having to put up with the results of politicians and bureaucrats. That's a big difference. These guys have spent a career creating roadblocks and doing things for most of us in business we're not happy with. And it shouldn't be hard to deduce here. Do you want to send somebody from the farm system of politics and give them a promotion when they've been part of a body that's got a 10 or 15% approval rate? I mean, come on. That's the problem we've had in DC for years and years. And these guys have been part of it, and they need to accept that responsibility. Trump agenda, when it comes to getting things done, repeal and replace Obamacare, I've done real things in my own business. I can take that to DC and make a difference. When it comes to securing the border, when it comes to rebuilding infrastructure, who do you think is going to know more about that? I want to make it real simple. Luke Messer, a lawyer that never really practiced, career politician. Todd Rokita, a lawyer that never really practiced his own trade, career politician. Joe Donnelly, a lawyer that never really practiced, career politician. Mike Braun, an entrepreneur that's done things in the real world. Who would you trust in DC? Thank you.
Mr. Braun, Mr. Messer, Mr. Rokita, thank you. This concludes the Indiana Republican primary Senate debate. Our thanks to the three of you and your staffs for working so hard to help put this together. Our thanks to Justin Stevens.